My father threw me into the snow and told me I was dead to him. But the woman who found me that night gave me a new life, and a reason to keep breathing when my father discovered I was pregnant. He didn't care how it happened. He didn't care that the man responsible was twice my age, or that I had screamed and fought and begged for help that never came. All he saw was disgrace. That night in the middle of winter, he dragged me outside and hurled me into the snow while my mother stood behind him, silent and trembling. I was 17, barefoot and shaking so violently I could barely breathe. I remember the door slamming behind me and the echo of his words, "You're not my daughter anymore." I spent that night hiding in a park restroom, huddled on the freezing tile floor, whispering to the small life growing inside me. I didn't want the baby, not then, but I didn't want to die either. I just wanted anyone to care if I lived. By morning, I found myself inside the school building, trying to clean my face in the bathroom mirror before anyone saw me. That's where Grace Whitaker found me. She was my English teacher, the one who always said stories could save people, even when life didn't. When she saw my garbage bags filled with clothes, I broke. I sobbed so hard that my body shook. "You're coming with me," she said gently. I didn't even argue. I just collapsed against her shoulder and let her hold me. No one had touched me since that night, and I'd forgotten what comfort felt like. She canceled her classes that day, packed me into her small car, and took me home. The entire drive I cried, not because I was sad, but because kindness felt so foreign it hurt. Her house was quiet and filled with books, and two cats who kept curling against my stomach like they knew something sacred was there. Grace gave me her office to sleep in, turned it into a small bedroom, and drove me to every doctor's appointment. The nurses often assumed she was my mother, and we never corrected them. She sat beside me through every wave of morning sickness, holding my hair and telling me stories about her wife, Laura Bennett, who had passed away 3 years earlier. They had wanted children but never got the chance. "Maybe you and this baby are my second chance," she said once while rubbing my back as I threw up. I cried quietly because she was being the mother mine refused to be. We built a rhythm together. I did my online classes while she graded papers. I helped her with essays. She helped me believe my future wasn't ruined. As my belly grew, so did something else. Hope. Grace would place her palm on my stomach and whisper to the baby about all the places they'd go, the books they'd read, and the songs they'd sing. For the first time, I started to believe we could actually have a life. When my contractions began, she stayed beside me through 19 hours of screaming and sobbing. I begged for my mother, but no one came. Grace held my hand the entire time. She cut the umbilical cord herself and was the first person to hold my son. We both cried when his tiny fingers wrapped around hers. "Can he call you Grandma?" I asked weakly. She nodded through her tears, whispering yes like it was the most precious word in the world. From then on, it was the three of us, Grace, me, and little Caleb. Her home turned into a sanctuary filled with lullabies, laughter, and second chances. She taught Caleb songs in different languages. I taught him to laugh at my silly faces. He said "Mama" to me and "Grandma" to her. He took his first steps reaching for her glasses as sunlight streamed through the window. And in that moment, I realized that family isn't about blood. It's about who chooses to stay when everyone else leaves. For 2 years, we lived peacefully. Then one afternoon, Grace opened the door and froze. Standing there in his pressed suit, holding the same cruel expression he had the night he threw me out, was my father. My heart sank. He looked around our little home like it disgusted him. "Your mother's sick with shame," he said coldly. "She wants to see her grandson before she dies. Come home, apologize, maybe we can forgive you." Before I could answer, Grace stepped between us. "You need to leave," she said firmly. "Right now? She's my daughter," he shouted, face turning red. "You have no right to keep her from her family." Grace didn't even flinch. "She became my daughter the day you threw her into the snow." His voice rose, accusing her of all kinds of vile things, calling her a predator, a manipulator, a pervert who preyed on broken girls. I wanted to disappear from the shame of it, but Grace stood tall, unshaken. "Everyone already knows who I am," she said calmly. "I'm the woman who saved your daughter when you left her to die." Then she closed the door in his face and called the police. I thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. Part 2, the hospital, the battle, and the goodbye the next morning, Grace didn't come to breakfast. Something inside me snapped before my brain could understand why. I ran to her room and found her collapsed on the floor, clutching her chest, whispering my name. The paramedics worked on her for nearly 40 minutes. I held Caleb as he screamed, asking why Grandma wouldn't wake up. They managed to restart her heart, but she was unresponsive, hooked to machines that breathed and beat for her. A doctor handed me paperwork. "She made you her medical proxy," he said quietly. "She didn't want to be kept alive artificially." The words blurred together. My hands shook so badly that I couldn't even hold the pen. Caleb sat on the hospital floor, tracing the lines of Grace's palm, asking why she wouldn't squeeze back like always. A social worker named Janet Monroe arrived, carrying folders and a kind voice. She found us a quiet room and explained everything. What medical proxy meant, what extraordinary measures were, what it meant to let someone go. Then a man named Mark Sullivan from legal aid joined us. He was calm and patient, explaining my rights and Grace's wishes. When I asked about my father, he told me plainly that he had no legal claim to Caleb or to any decision about Grace. "She made everything official," Mark said. "You're her chosen family." The relief hit me so hard I cried until my throat hurt. Over the next days, the ICU became our world. Caleb refused to eat unless he could see Grandma. I told him stories about her as machines beeped around us. I begged for another neurological exam, hoping for a miracle. The doctors didn't argue, they just nodded gently and scheduled it. But when the results came back, the hope I'd been holding onto finally shattered. Her brain had been without oxygen too long. There was no activity left, no thought, no feeling, no pain. The doctor showed me the scans, dark and hollow where light should have been. He said the machines were only keeping her heart beating. Janet arranged a family meeting for the next morning, even though it was just me and Caleb. That night, I sat by Grace's bed, writing her a letter through tears. I wrote about the night she found me, about how she'd saved me when no one else did, and about how Caleb would always know the woman who gave us a home. While I read it aloud, two of her coworkers came in quietly with a cardboard box. Inside were dozens of cards from her students, each one thanking her for believing in them. Caleb sat on the floor, pulling out the drawings one by one, giggling at the colors. Then Mark returned with serious news. My father had filed a harassment complaint and posted lies about Grace on Facebook, calling her a predator. "We're filing a restraining order," Mark said firmly. "He's trying to destroy her even now. But he won't succeed." I signed everything he gave me, my hands trembling. Janet helped with hospital paperwork, explaining charity programs that would cover most of the bills. I didn't have the strength to argue anymore. I just wanted Grace to wake up. That night my phone buzzed with messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, screenshots, comments. My father's smear post was spreading online, his bitterness poisoning everything Grace had built. I sat there in the dim hospital light, Caleb asleep on my chest, and looked at Grace. Her hand was still warm, her face peaceful. I whispered the same words she'd told me that first night in her home, words that had once saved me from breaking completely. "You're safe now," I said through tears. "You don't have to fight anymore." When morning came, I signed the papers to remove the machines. The room filled with a silence that was both unbearable and sacred. The monitors stopped one by one until all that was left was Caleb's soft breathing against my shoulder. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Thank you for choosing us." Outside, the snow had started to fall again, soft, quiet, forgiving. I stood there holding my son, knowing that the woman who once pulled me out of the cold had finally found her own peace. And I promised her that I'd keep the warmth alive, for both of us. He accused her of manipulating me when I was homeless and pregnant, twisting every good thing she'd ever done into something cruel. The post was already blowing up, hundreds of comments. Some were from her old students defending her as the kindest teacher they'd ever had. But others, strangers who didn't know her, believed his lies and were demanding investigations. I wanted to type the truth, to tell everyone how she had saved us. But before I could hit send, Mark snatched my phone and shouted no. He said anything I posted could be twisted and used against us later, that we had to stay quiet for legal reasons. But watching her reputation crumble while she was lying there, dying, it shredded my heart. The next morning, we had the care conference that Janet had arranged. The entire medical team was there. The room was packed with doctors, nurses, and a calm-spoken woman who introduced herself as the hospital's ethics consultant. Her voice was steady and warm as she spoke about quality of life, pain, and what it truly meant to honor someone's wishes. She reread Grace's advance directive, especially the part that said she never wanted machines keeping her alive if there was no hope. The consultant explained that keeping her on life support when she had clearly asked not to wasn't love, it was denying her the peace she'd chosen. By the end of that meeting, I was crying so hard I couldn't even breathe. But somewhere inside that pain, I finally understood what I had to do. That night was brutal. Caleb kept waking up screaming from nightmares, calling out for Grandma to check under the bed for monsters, something she always did for him. He'd started sucking his thumb again, something he hadn't done in years. Watching him regress broke me more than I thought possible. I held him tight on that tiny hospital cot while he sobbed, asking why Grandma wouldn't wake up to sing their bedtime song that chased the bad dreams away. All I could do was whisper that Grandma still loved him, even while she was sleeping, and that only made him cry harder because deep down, he knew something wasn't right. The next morning, Mark told me we needed to go to Grace's house to look for important paperwork before things progressed further. Driving there without her sitting beside me, telling Caleb to count red cars like she always did, felt hollow. Unlocking her front door with the key she'd given me made me feel like I was trespassing, even though she'd always said this house was ours too. The scent hit me first, lavender lotion and old books, the smell of safety and warmth. Her coffee mug was still on the table beside a stack of essays waiting to be graded, her glasses resting neatly on top, as if she'd only stepped out for a minute. Caleb ran straight for his toy box and began pulling out the blocks Grandma had bought him. I just stood there frozen. Mark gently guided me to her home office, saying we needed her insurance and bank documents. On her desk sat a thick binder labeled Important Documents, Insurance Banking House. Everything was organized with color tabs and sticky notes explaining each section. She had even written little instructions in her perfect teacher handwriting, like she'd known I'd need help one day. At the back was a sealed envelope with my name written on it. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a long letter in her handwriting. She wrote about how Caleb and I had become the children she and Laura had always dreamed of having. How the day she found me crying in the school restroom was the day her life started making sense again after losing Laura. She said that watching me grow into a mother, despite everything I'd endured, had been the greatest honor of her life. The letter ended by saying she knew I was strong enough to take care of Caleb, no matter what happened. That she would always be proud of her daughter, even if the law refused to see it that way. I sank to the floor of her office, clutching that letter and sobbing, while Caleb played in the next room. Mark sat beside me and quietly started flipping through the binder, explaining things gently so I could understand. Grace had left everything, the house, her accounts, her savings, to me and Caleb. But the house still had a mortgage because she had refinanced it to pay for Laura's cancer treatments. Mark showed me bank statements and credit cards I never knew existed. She'd shielded us from every burden. He said the probate process could take months and that we might have to sell the house to cover what was left. The thought of losing her home, the only place that had ever felt safe, made my stomach turn. But Mark promised we'd take it one day at a time. Back at the hospital, Dr. Chen was waiting with one final proposal. He wanted to reduce her sedation the next morning to perform one last test for any sign of response. He made it clear it was unlikely, but he wanted me to have absolute certainty before making a final decision. I agreed immediately. I needed to know, truly know, that she was gone. The next morning, they lowered her medication while Dr. Chen and two other doctors monitored her closely. Caleb sat on my lap, making car noises with his little toy as we waited. Dr. Chen said her name, shone a light into her eyes, and pressed on her nail beds to test for pain. Her eyes didn't move. Her pupils didn't react. Her fingers stayed limp. They tried everything and nothing changed. After half an hour, Dr. Chen rested his hand on my shoulder and softly confirmed what I already knew. Grace was gone. The machines were breathing for her, but her mind, herself, was no longer there. Caleb looked up at me and asked, "Did Grandma get fixed yet?" And I had to say no, swallowing the scream rising in my chest. That afternoon, Janet brought in a grief counselor who worked with young caregivers. She sat beside me, validating every feeling, the fear, the anger, the helplessness. She taught me a simple breathing exercise. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4. It actually helped when I thought I might faint from the anxiety. She said what I was feeling, mourning someone who was still alive, was called anticipatory grief. That it was real, that it was okay. That loving someone meant wishing for their peace even when it hurt you the most. As I left the session, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it. But it was my mother. Her voice was thin and shaky as she asked if it was true that Grace was in the hospital. She said she'd heard from my cousin Emily, and she wanted to meet Caleb to make things right. But her apology came with strings attached. She said she'd only do it if I apologized to my father for causing all this trouble. She wanted to meet secretly because he'd be furious if he found out. Even now, she couldn't love me without conditions. I told her she could only see Caleb if my father wasn't involved, and that we'd meet in public. She reluctantly agreed, her voice trembling. For the first time, I realized she was as trapped by him as I once was. Later that day, the school's HR called. Their investigation found no wrongdoing. Many teachers had vouched for Grace's integrity, calling her one of the most professional educators they'd ever known. The case stayed open only for paperwork, but it was obvious the truth had won. A small victory in the middle of everything falling apart. The next day, a child therapist came to help Caleb understand what was happening. She used dolls to explain that Grandma's body was very sick, and the machines were helping her breathe. Caleb nodded like he understood, but he kept glancing at the door, waiting for her to walk in. That afternoon, I took him to Laura's grave. He ran around picking dandelions while I sat there, telling Laura that Grace might be joining her soon, that she had saved us, and that I didn't know how to let her go. Caleb laid his flowers on the stone and said softly, "Grandma, play with this lady in heaven." I barely managed to whisper yes before hugging him tight, tears soaking his hair. When we returned to the hospital, Dr. Chen was waiting with his final report. He gently said that continuing life support would only prolong suffering, that Grace's own written words made it clear she didn't want that. The truth landed like a weight on my chest. That night, I sat beside her bed rereading her letter, her words about trust and love and letting go. She said she would always be proud of me, that she wanted me to live free, not bound by guilt. Mark came by the next morning with the paperwork for my father's restraining order. The court date was set. He said the Facebook lies and HR complaint showed a pattern, something judges took seriously. Somehow, it felt like Grace was still fighting for us. That afternoon, my father tried to force his way into the hospital, but security stopped him thanks to Janet's warning. He screamed about his rights and demanded to see his grandson, but the guards removed him and handed him an official notice banning him from the premises. Watching it from an upstairs window, I felt terrified, but also, for the first time, protected. Later, I met with the counselor again. She reminded me that respecting Grace's wishes wasn't betrayal, it was love, true love. And that understanding finally gave me peace to do what I had to. The next morning, I found Dr. Chen and told him, "Tomorrow, we'll remove the machines tomorrow." He placed a comforting hand on my shoulder and promised she'd feel no pain, and that they'd give us as much time as we needed. That day, Caleb and I decorated her room. We taped his crayon drawings all around her bed, read her favorite poems, and even made handprints with paint, his small palm pressed over hers. Caleb kissed her fingers, giggling like it was one of their morning games. That night when he fell asleep in the chair, I recorded a video for him to watch when he's older, telling him who Grace was, how she saved us, and how much she loved him. My voice cracked over and over, but I wanted him to remember her forever. When the morning came, my body shook so badly I could barely stand. The respiratory team entered and quietly explained each step. I held Grace's hand so tightly my knuckles turned white. Caleb sat in my lap, humming her favorite lullaby. When they disconnected the ventilator, there was a brief hiss, and then silence. Grace's chest rose and fell softly for a while, each breath slower than the last. I whispered that it was okay to go, that Laura was waiting for her. Caleb waved goodbye, blowing her kisses the way he did before daycare. After 30 minutes, her breathing grew faint, and then one last exhale. The nurse checked for a heartbeat and shook her head gently. The room was completely still. They let us stay for as long as we wanted. Caleb patted her face, whispering for her to wake up and sing their morning song. And I just held him, my son, her grandson, both of us surrounded by the quiet she left behind. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a comment. Hit subscribe, follow for more, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next one.